Good morning, Europe, or good day, wherever you are. I'm Joachim, and I am the co-founder of StepUpLabs.co. Our mission, to help you create a life that you really, really like, doing something that you love. And how are we going to do that? Well, we do business coaching based on lifestyle design, and we support you through the process of transformation. I'm still in Tokyo at the moment, and it's been an amazing day here. Beautiful blue sky, very sunny, 19 degrees. So I went for a lovely walk in the park that is right around the corner of where I live here. And yeah, it's just so amazing. And I have to admit, while I was walking, I was just thinking that my life is so incredibly wonderful. And I am so grateful. Grateful that I allowed myself to be intentional about my lifestyle and the way that I have created this huge shift in how I earn a living in my life. And you can too. How, you ask? Well, it's very simple, really. There's only one thing that you have to do, and that is overcome your fear. Which brings us to the topic of today's talk, which is fear is the mind killer. You chose it because we did a poll to see what was the topic that you were most interested in hearing about, and what the thing was that you thought would help you the most. Now, it's really interesting to me that this topic won, because it's certainly not the most obvious topic when it comes to creating businesses or creating a lifestyle that you love. Fear is this thing. I think fear, based on my experience with clients that I've worked with, is probably the number one problem that we all face, but that we are very rarely aware of or even talk about. It manifests in, I'd say, mysterious ways, and it often requires quite a bit of digging before we understand that the true core problem of something that we are facing is actually fear. So thank you for choosing this subject, and I think it's very necessary to talk about fear. And as soon as we do, we set ourselves up to take a step up. Now, fear, I believe, is universal. Fear is probably one of our oldest and most profound emotional responses. That is also physical at the same time. Fear is a very strong thing inside of the body. And fear is deeply linked to our survival instinct. And if we go really deep into fear, I guess we can say that our most prominent fear, our most important fear of all of us probably is the fear of death. But that would probably be too philosophical as a theme for today's talk. So I'm going to try to limit myself to things that have a real impact in taking action, in doing the things that you want to do, in creating the life you love, and in maybe creating a business that can support your lifestyle. Now, the first thing I want to say is that we have to understand that fear will never go away. Fear is not something you can get rid of. Fear is deeply ingrained in ourselves and is just a part of our system, of how we are wired. I think that trying to make fear disappear is the best way of actually amplifying that fear, and at the same time creating a lot of anxiety around that. So that's not the way to deal with this. We should just accept that fear is there, and at best we can create strategies and techniques to cope or deal with the fear in a way that it doesn't hold us back, and in a way that it doesn't control how we act. Now, I was thinking today while I was writing this talk, like, okay, fear, there's not just one thing called fear, right? There's different types of fear. I guess I identified for myself two main types of fear. One is the real physical fear, a response of our brain and our system and our body to a direct threat. Like suppose you meet a snake or a lion, or someone points a gun at your face. That is a very visceral, real kind of fear in that moment. But this is something that I think we rarely experience in our daily lives now. Maybe in circumstances where, you cross the street and there's a red light that you hadn't seen and a car has to brake in front of you. And, in that moment, that's the kind of fear that you feel, this very strong body response. On the other hand, the other type of fear, I think the fear that we deal with most often, is the fear that I would say exists as a kind of like a reaction of our system to a future projection. And then this could be either the fear of future fear. For example, if you're afraid of going out at night because you might meet someone who will try to, say, rob you, you don't have the fear of having that person in front of you at that time, but you have the fear of that happening in the future, and so the fear of feeling that fear in the future. And then the other very strong one, I think, is the fear of shame. And that's a very interesting and powerful one, because that's truly toxic when it comes to holding us back to take action. It's the fear of doing something that will create shame in us. And shame is a very difficult emotion that we like to avoid. So I think a lot of the stuff that we need to be doing and we don't do because of fear is actually because of fear of future shame. But I'll go into that a bit deeper later. Now, what I want to talk today, what I want to talk about today mostly is how to deal with fear. What are the techniques that I use that have been successful for me, both in creating the life that I want for myself, overcoming the things that I believe were holding me back to be able to do that, and at the same time also the fears that held me back in developing my business and still today. So I want to talk about how I cope with fear, how I deal with fear, how my whole mindset is when it comes to fear. And I've identified several categories that I want to talk about. So I'm going to give a small overview first of the different subjects. So there's mindfulness and meditation as a way of dealing with fear, Stoicism as a mental tool, cultivating courage, very important in dealing with fear, then the idea of using fear as a compass, an exercise that I call facing your fears, and then the idea of speaking up and overcoming the fear of shame by sharing it. So let's start with mindfulness and meditation. I believe when it comes to fear, mindfulness and meditation serve a double purpose. On the one hand, they really help you in being aware of the fear in the first place. One of the big problems we have with fear in complex issues such as lifestyle and business is that we very often rationalize the fear, and we are not entirely aware of the fact that fear is actually at the root of something we are not succeeding at. So for me, cultivating mindfulness and doing meditation has really helped in becoming more aware of where exactly the fears are located in me. And this awareness has helped me to take the next step, which is to face those fears or to solve them or to not let them have any impact on you anymore. On the other hand, meditation and mindfulness also tremendously help with managing the impact of the fear. Once you have the fear and you're aware of it and sit with the fear, the way that you react to it, whether or not you actually allow it to influence you, is something that can be really also very well managed by mindfulness or meditation techniques. If you're interested in exploring this, I recommend that you start with a very simple mindfulness meditation for 5 minutes every day. Now, don't tell me that you don't have 5 minutes every day to greatly improve your life by meditating for 5 minutes. That's, I don't believe you. If you think that you really can't find 5 minutes and you want to use that as an excuse, then please stop watching this video right now and just meditate instead. I think it will be more effective. One of the ways that you can do this is actually by using an app. The app that I use that I would highly recommend, it's called Headspace. You can get it in the Apple Store or on the Google Play Store. And the first 10 sessions of this app are free, so that you can see if it's something for you. Afterwards, you have to pay, but it's very reasonable, and I think it's absolutely worth it. I want to share with you that meditation changed my life. Mindfulness and meditation have really changed the way that I handle things, have also made me so much aware of the fears that were inside of me that I never knew were there. And that has greatly, greatly impacted my life and made it so much better. It's probably one of the most transformative experiences of my life. So it's something I really highly recommend. The second way that I use, and I think we can talk about when dealing with fear, is Stoicism as a mental tool. Now, Stoicism is actually a philosophical school from more than 2,000 years ago. The most known figures of this school are probably Seneca and Marcus Aurelius. And a few of the key ideas of Stoicism as a philosophy are that humans are social beings, and we can find happiness in accepting the moment as it is, and in not letting ourselves being controlled by either the desire for pleasure or the fear of pain. And it's a very ethical kind of framework as well, that is a lot about cooperation and treating others fairly and justly. Now you'll ask, what does this have to do with fear exactly? Well, there's a very famous letter of Seneca where he talks about one of his techniques to cope with fear. And it's very old, but I think it's still very relevant today. He writes that basically he puts himself into the position that he fears most, which for him was a lot to do with poverty, with not having much. So he took a few days every month to dress very modestly in very cheap clothes and to go out on the streets and to eat only like the cheapest food, very basic things, drink only water, and not too much else, while constantly asking himself the question, okay, I am now in this situation that is pretty close to how I would be if my fears come true. And is this really what I fear so much? Is this really as bad as I imagine in my head when I have this fear? And putting himself in that position helped him to overcome his fear of poverty, because he understood that even as a poor person, his life would be manageable and he would survive, and he would probably do things that would get him out of that situation. So you can do the same in many ways. Sometimes I read about people doing this nowadays, for example, combining this mental process with fasting, because obviously fasting is something that possibly might happen if one of your big fears comes true and that you have no money to buy food. So if you're able to fast for a couple of days, at the same time, you can work on that fear and think like, okay, so if this is really so bad, why am I doing this? And how am I actually coping with this? And it helps. For myself, I like to face this way of doing things by having periods of time in which I do not buy anything. Like the idea that I don't really need anything is very helpful in dealing with fear about like not having enough. And so I realized that when I go through those periods, I often do that for like 2 or 3 days, and I buy nothing at all. And it's very empowering because you feel, first of all, that you have power over how you act and how you deal with money. And at the same time, you feel that it's not that bad. It's not so horrible. Now, of course, this is something that only works because it's like a small period of time, but it helps as a mechanism to deal with that fear and liberates you from that specific fear that can hold you back for actually doing things that might involve some kind of risk. The next method or thing I like to use is cultivating courage. Now, courage is very interesting. I used to think very differently about courage. I used to have these like boys' fantasies about courageous people being totally free of fear and, just doing whatever it is that they needed to do. But I've understood now that courage is not the opposite of fear. Courage isn't even the absence of fear. No, courage is exactly being able to take action while facing the fear. It's exactly the ability to do things while the fear is present. Now, courage is not a character trait. Courage is not a fixed property of human beings. It's not like there are courageous people and non-courageous people. No, courage is a skill, is a practice, much like meditation or yoga. It's something that you have to do in order to develop it. So how do you develop courage? As Brené Brown beautifully writes, you do it by couraging. It's a verb. You can think about courage as a muscle that you have to train. So when you start weightlifting, for example, you won't start lifting 200 kilograms, right? You start with small weights and you gradually build it up. It's the same with courage. I would advise anyone, if they want to build up their courage, to start with small fears. And there's a number of exercises you can do for yourself. For me personally, I've been forcing myself to sit with discomfort in social situations where I would before maybe have said something to ease the tension, or maybe even like where I've gone away from the situation because I felt some kind of discomfort. I now force myself to sit in that place to feel the discomfort, and that is scary, but it's for me a small way in which I practice my courage, and it helps. Other things you can do to cultivate courage is, for example, to force yourself to do things that normally people don't. Like one exercise that I read about is to negotiate a discount in your favorite coffee place, which is very strange. I mean, you go to buy a coffee and then you negotiate a small discount. It doesn't even matter how much the discount is. It's about the fact that you take the courage to actually ask for a discount. That's the whole point. Even if you are refused the discount, it's absolutely fine because you will have already gained what you wanted from that exercise. Fear as a compass. That's a very interesting idea that I've been thinking about a lot because also in my life, it had profound implications. The idea is that what we are most afraid of might well be where we most need to go in order to grow, in order to develop ourselves. We as humans have a tendency to avoid pain, and emotional work, like overcoming fear, is often painful and difficult. So we tend to avoid it. We tend to procrastinate it. We tend to not think about it too much. But of course, the thing is that if you run away from the emotional work that you need to do in order to grow, nothing happens. So here's an idea. Every time that you feel you're afraid of something, that you feel a fear, how about you ask yourself, why is this fear there? What is this fear? Is it something important that I'm avoiding? Is there something there in that fear that needs to be taken care of, that needs attention? Can I sit with that fear and let it guide me to the place where I need to do some emotional labor on myself so that I can address it in my own time? A great example of this from my own life is one of the basic golden rules that I made up together with my business partner, Tine, in Victoria Designs when we started out. The rule was very simple. We will never hire anyone. This was clearly, so clearly in retrospect, based on fear. But at the time when we made up that rule, it was very rational. It was very clear that, we had all kinds of reasons. It was about efficiency, about ease of working. But that was all just rationalization. It was really just about fear, the fear of having to deal with someone that you kind of are responsible for, because you have to give them money and you're responsible for training them or making sure that they feel good in your organization. And then you're responsible for giving them feedback, all that kind of stuff. And that was very scary. But of course, I wasn't aware of that. So now in the past year, I've slowly realized that that fear guided me to the place where I needed to be. Because this is, I think, the one most important thing that we can do for Victoria Designs to grow the business, is to actually hire a team and work with people. And so I finally faced that fear, and now I'm in the process of actually hiring a team. So this is a great example of something that was a great fear that was actually leading me right to the place where I needed to do some work. Now, an exercise that I would call facing your fears. This is something that helped me a lot. Take a sheet of paper, divide it into 3 columns. In the first column, you write down all the fears connected to whatever issue that you're dealing with at the moment. Be specific, be very clear, be exhaustive, and be honest to yourself in understanding what your fears are. The more honest you will be, the more effective the exercise. An example would be if you're trying to create a different lifestyle, you're trying to make a big change in your life and maybe start your own business. You could say that you have a fear that choosing to build a life that I really want is going to alienate me from my family, my friends, my colleagues. Then in the second column, write down in detail what the worst possible outcome would be if that fear actually comes true. Now, in our example, that would be, because I alienated all the people by choosing a different lifestyle, I will be forever alone and miserable. That's the worst possible outcome. And then in the third column, you write down the solution to the worst possible outcome of your fear. In our example, this will be, hey, wait a second, when I'm alone because I choose a new lifestyle, I can probably connect to other people that I get to know that are connected to that lifestyle or who have the same kind of issues that I have now. So I won't be alone. Now sit back when you have the 3 columns and then try to imagine, try to define for yourself, how likely is that worst case scenario going to happen? And how easily was it for you to come up with a solution? Is it really that bad? Even if the worst case scenario comes true, which is very unlikely, it's very probable that you will find a solution to it afterwards. An extra step with this exercise could be that you also list the worst possible outcome of not doing what you feel like you have to do. So you have both sides. You have the worst possible outcome if you do it, and the worst possible outcome if you don't do it. And in our example, that would be, I will never start building the life that I really want, so I will be stuck in my job that I don't like, or commuting every day to work for 2 hours because, traffic jams and stuff. That's the idea. And do you, at that point, still feel that fear that you have was so horrible compared to the worst possible outcome of not taking action because of the fear? Now, I have to thank a friend of mine for this exercise, which we used to overcome my fears of being sexually intimate with her. There were so many fears around my intimacy and my sexuality, and they were both in my head and my body and everywhere. And so we sat down and she patiently asked me to voice all those fears, to write them down in detail, all of them, and to examine what was the worst possible outcome of all those fears, and then how we could fix those. And it was very effective. And I was amazed at how tiny and silly most of my fears looked like when I actually voiced them and wrote them down. And well, many sexy times were had after that exercise, so it's something that I would really recommend. Now, speaking up and overcoming the fear of shame. A good example was what I just did. Expressing my fears around my sexuality is a way of healing shame by bringing it to the light. Now, shame is a very complex and difficult emotion that is responsible, I believe, for many, many problems that we face. It falls a bit outside of the scope of this talk specifically, so I won't go very deeply into shame. If you're interested in exploring shame and learning all about it, I highly recommend the work of Brené Brown, who is in the first place actually a shame researcher. So she is the authority, and she wrote many interesting books about shame and how to overcome it. The main thing to keep in mind for this talk is that shame can only exist in isolation. Shame thrives in the dark, deep corners of our mind. The most effective way of dealing with shame is to bring it into the light, to share it, to express it, and together with others who we trust, explore it. Being vulnerable is the beginning, I believe, of a deep understanding that we all face fears and shame, and that we can cultivate compassion as a method of helping ourselves and others. This leads me into vulnerability. I've already tried it a bit, but I believe very much that it's important that I practice what I preach. And so I would like to take this opportunity to do something very scary and something that creates deep fear in me. Because I really believe that creating vulnerability is a good step towards not giving your fear power over how you act. So if you don't mind, I'd like to share with you what I am afraid about. I fear of not being enough. I fear of not being good enough. I fear of not being worthy. I fear not being lovable. I fear failure, as it carries shame, but I also fear success, as it carries responsibility. I fear taking up the role that I feel I need to take out of fear of disappointing you, who listen to me. I fear showing myself. I fear that you've had quite enough of this already, and that you left to do something more fun than listening to my fears. So feel free to tell me, if you're still there, what do you fear? I will take this opportunity now to first check if anyone has some questions for me. This is always a bit tricky as I have to scroll through a bunch of people and comments. Fear of the middle pocket. Yes, indeed, Xavier. That's an insider joke, I guess. Yes. A great way to seduce a man. Maria, that's interesting. I've never tried that, but I bet you can, and then you can tell me what it was like. Okay, mostly people sharing that they have faced some fears in some way. Thank you, Ulrike, for telling me that the amount of viewers hasn't changed since I started. That's a great thing. It means you're still here and you're listening and you're enjoying this. Okay, so there's no real questions. Then this was the end of my talk today. I hope that you enjoyed it and that it inspires you to somehow take action, whatever small action it may be, to overcome your fears. Because we all do have fears, and that's okay. And actually, I want to share that I believe that most of the people that we have had a free coaching session with StepUpLabs.co and that have asked for an offer to work with us and that afterwards did not go through with that cooperation, I believe most of those people were held back by fear. Fear of if this will be a good investment, fear if, what will happen if I don't succeed, what if I'm not a good coachee, all those things. Most of the reasons people give us, of course, not to work with us are very different, are rationalizations of those fears, but I believe that they are really fears, and that's okay, because that happens to everyone, and we will be here whenever those people are ready to face those fears and not let them control them anymore. Don't forget to join our group, StepUpLabs.co, create the lifestyle you want, doing what you love. I will post a link under this video as usual. Please feel free to join our community there to find support and inspiration in your transformation process. And don't forget that if you join, you can book a 30-minute free coaching call with either my co-founder Elena or me. I leave you today with a quote, as actually the title of this talk was taken from a book, Dune, by Frank Herbert, which I liked a lot when I was younger. And, well, it's a great book. And for me, this quote is a beautiful metaphor for the reality of dealing with my fears. And the quote is this: I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will permit it to pass over me and through me. And when it has gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear has gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain. Have a great day.